What is up, guys? It is the Sound Alchemist, and I'm back at it to bring you more facts on the Warhammer 40k universe. This time, we will be going over to Chaos, talking about one of my favorite characters in all of Warhammer, being 40k and 30k. This guy is Ahzek Ahriman, one of the strongest psykers ever produced by the Thousand Sons. Now, what really drew me to this guy was, at first, the color scheme. His 30k armor is just awesome. It's amazing. The red and the yellow, it's just amazing. And then when he delved into the chaotic arts of Tzeentch, that's when he became even more powerful. He's got that awesome blue and gold. It's just awesome. The whole aspect of like Egyptian, symbols and the whole pyramid kind of thing, it just makes this guy even more badass. So without further ado, here are 40 facts on Ahzek Ahriman, but this is just 30k. So here are the 30k facts for Ahriman. So Ahriman is a Chaos Space Marine of the Thousand Sons Space Marine Legion, and the greatest sorcerer to have ever been produced by the Thousand Sons. He is a Terran Marine that rose through the ranks of his legion to become the first captain, the chief librarian, and the preeminent master of one of their psychic disciplines, precognition. But before we get to all that, let's learn about his origins. Ahzek Ahriman was born on Terra, among the wealthy tribes of the Archimedean Empire, whose kings had allied with the Emperor during the Unification Wars. Because of this alliance, Ahriman's tribes were largely spared the horrors of the Atomic Wars and Proto-Astartes invasions. Following the Emperor's victory in Terra's alliance with Mars, Ahriman and his twin brother Ormuzd were selected to be inducted into the ranks of the Legion Astartes. Ahriman brothers traveled to the stars alongside the Emperor and his legions as part of the Great Crusade. But 5 years into the expedition, the Thousand Sons Legion began manifesting psychic abilities, and with these manifestations began the terrible curse known as the Flesh Change. Over time, the problem became so severe that many people thought that the Imperium should suggest that the Thousand Sons be disbanded. However, when the Crusade reached Magnus upon Prospero, the Primarch of the Thousand Sons was seemingly able to eradicate the threat of the Flesh Change, although only a fraction of the affected Marines survived the mysterious process. One of those who perished, unfortunately, was Ormuzd Ahriman, whose passing instilled in his twin brother both great grief and great dread of the Flesh Change. In remembrance of his brother, Ahzek had Ormuzd pendant, the twin of his own, both gifts from their mothers, worked into the shoulder guard of his armor. Ahriman rose to the position of chief librarian of the Legion, and then captain of the First Fellowship, which he became commander of the elite Sekhmet, and leader of the Legion's most powerful cult, the Corvidae, all at the same time. Despite this impressive record, little is currently known of the bulk of Ahriman's career as a legionary. The earliest mention of him is a note of his 5 years during the World Bearers Legion, where he found himself uncomfortable with their expressions in the belief of the Emperor's divinity. Despite this period where he was unhappy, Ahriman did consider that he had become friends with the Word Bearer's Astarte named Erebus. He is also on record as being in favor of the assignment of the Remembrancers to the Crusade forces, believing the documenting of his legion as one in a way in which the wider body of the Imperium could learn to understand, and therefore no longer fear the Psyker. The earliest detailed mention of Ahriman in historical records currently is during the Argu campaign, a compliance action carried out by the Thousand Sons on the 20th expedition towards the close of the 2nd century of the Great Crusade. During this campaign, Ahriman is noted to have risked his Primarch's displeasure by leading a search team for him after Magnus made himself absent from the Legion, despite Magnus's prior insistence that he was not to be disturbed. This is the first time that he is known to have both mistrusted the judgment of his Primarch and also ignored his wishes. Towards the end of the campaign, when a contingent of Space Wolves arrived to convey a message to Magnus from Leman Russ, Ahriman found himself falling into an association with the Space Wolf's rune priest, Othir Wormdrake, during which he shared information on the Thousand Sons' psychic disciplines in what he thought was a meeting of like-minded individuals, but would later prove treacherous. His perceived fledgling kinship with the Rune Priest proved helpful. However, when both the Space Wolves and the Thousand Sons were forced to engage in combat with the Xenos weapon forms and hostile denizens of the Warp before leaving Argu. Around this time, Ahriman was charged with inducting the Remembrancer Lemuel Gauman into the ways of the Thousand Sons by Magnus the Red, in an overt attempt to develop Gauman's own psychic abilities and help spread understanding of Magnus's philosophies. Ahriman took Gauman on his probationer and spent a significant amount of time illuminating and training the Remembrancer throughout the period leading up to the burning of Prospero. This training including taking Gauman among combat missions during the pacification of Helosia, where Ahriman was present for the return of the flesh change in his legion and the execution of those afflicted. The return of this flesh change to the Thousand Sons after Magnus had previously promised that he had banished this danger forever had a deep impact on Ahriman. His feelings of dread at the possibility of mutation and hurt betrayal caused by his Primarch's inability to protect the Legion being so strong that Gauman was able to detect them. Ahriman is next recorded being present at two of the most important historical events of this time period, the triumph of Olenor, at which Horus was made War Master, and during the Council of Nicaea, at which the Emperor outlawed the use of psychic powers within the Legion Astartes. To Ahriman, the Council of Nicaea felt more like a trial of the Thousand Sons, and his sense of angry betrayal and disillusion at the turn of events was made all the more keen by the fact that the first person to step forth and accuse the Thousand Sons of malign practices was his supposed ally and colleague, Othir Wormdrake. Ahriman is next spoken of in another strained meeting with his Primarch, as Magnus unveiled his own discernment, that of the oncoming fall upon Davin. Ahriman, along with the other senior figures of the Thousand Sons, was enlisted in aiding Magnus in his attempt to psychically protect Horus. In the aftermath of this subsequent failure, Magnus explained to Ahriman that he had been thwarted by agents of something he did not know or understand, called the Primordial Annihilator. However, Ahriman once again realized that his Primarch was lying to him, and that Magnus not only knew of this Annihilator, this chaos, he had dealt with it before. Rocked by these uncertain events and desperate to learn of the future, Ahriman authorized the supercharging of the precognition power of the Remembrancer Callista Eris, attached to the Thousand Sons. While she was able to deliver a prophecy to Ahriman's waiting ears, she also died, literally burnt out in the process. Ahriman's sanction of the death of an innocent prompted Lemuel Gauman to turn his back upon his mentor, ending both his training and their friendship. Magnus similarly cast about for direction at this time, and similarly made a questionable moral choice. He decided to use sorcerous techniques to attempt to contact the Emperor directly and communicate to him the news of Horus's betrayal and the machinations of chaos. Ahriman was selected to help him enact this spell, thus learning of the existence of demons, and to guard Magnus's mortal body during the process. Again, in the aftermath of failure, Ahriman discerned that Magnus was keeping knowledge from him and the Legion, this time learning not only the truth behind the cessation of the flesh change, Magnus striking the sorcerer's deal with the power of the warp to save his children, but also why he and the other Corvidae had been unable to predict an incoming retributive attack on Prospero. Magnus, in his grief and shame, had prevented it. Finally, at the great breaking point with his Primarch, Ahriman angrily refused to follow Magnus's order to stand down and await punishment. Instead, he declared, "We are the Red Sorcerers of Prospero, damned in the eyes of our fellows, and this is how our story ends. In betrayal and bloodshed? No, you may find it nobler to suffer your fate, but I will take arms against it." And with that declaration, the chief librarian of the Legion turned the Thousand Sons away from Magnus's design and led them in a desperate defense of their homeworld in the doomed battle that would come to be known as the Burning of Prospero. Though he knew much knowledge would be lost or destroyed during this battle, Ahriman vowed to restore all of it, no matter the cost. recognizing that, despite all their powers and strategies, there was only one person on Prospero who could decisively alter the fate of the Thousand Suns. Ahriman regularly implored Magnus to come to his son's aid during this battle. However, Magnus did not. Sensing Othir Wormdrake's presence in the approaching horde of space wolves, Ahriman made psychic contact with him, dragging him into the etheric plane to confront him there. The two psychers dueled for a time before Ahriman eventually gained the upper hand, using the opportunity to link minds with Wormdrake and dump the truth of the matter into the consciousness of the space wolf. Wormdrake learned it all: Horus's betrayal, the setting up of the Thousand Suns, and the space wolf's mistakes that led them to this point. Returning both himself and the day's Wormdrake to the mundane dimension, but still keeping their minds free of their bodies, Ahriman paused to look around the battlefield, witnessing Leman Russ kill Thousand Suns by the scores, and Space Wolf's mindless destruction of all that he cared about. In a moment's reflection upon vengeance, instead of releasing Wormdrake, and therefore potentially allowing the Rune Priest to spread his newly acquired knowledge of the truth, Ahriman spitefully cast Wormdrake's soul to the waiting void predators of the warp. Returning to his material body, Ahriman chose to accept the consequences of his action, believing his own imminent death and that of his legion was now all but inevitable. This belief was proved false, however, when Magnus the Red finally chose to enter the fray, entering in a duel with Leman Russ that stilled the battlefield, allowing Ahriman to pull the remaining Thousand Suns back to the Great Pyramid of Tizca. There he learned that Magnus, while unsure of his own fate, had foreseen that Ahriman would survive this day, and so had to bequeath him to the Book of Magnus, the Primarch's own tome of collected knowledge and incalculable sorcerous power. In psychic communication with him even as he fought the Wolf King, Magnus instructed Ahriman to do one last thing for him, and to receive one last gift. As Magnus fell, he transmitted a huge burst of his own etheric power into Ahriman, using the Chief Librarian as a psychic and sorceress conduit to all the surviving legionaries. Used as a vessel for Magnus's great spell, Ahzek, Ahriman, and all the other Thousand Suns vanished from Prospero. Having been transported through the raw warp itself, Ahriman found himself awakening upon a world that would later be called the Planet of Sorcerers, where he was reunited with the survivors of his legion, and now transformed into a being of etheric energy, Magnus the Red himself. Ahriman's next actions and the details of his participation in the Horus Heresy are not currently known, but what is recorded is that his decision to enact his own, now infamous, master spell. Witnessing the survivors of his legion continue to suffer the flesh change, Ahriman, determined to free himself and his brethren from this threat, he took the Book of Magnus and enlisted the aid of a cabal of senior surviving members of the Legion, including Hathor Mat, Ammon, and Sobek. Ahriman conceived a spell that aimed to permanently rid the Thousand Suns of this curse, called the Flesh Change. The result of the spell, called the Rubric of Ahriman, while imperfect, satisfied Ahriman in its consequence. It turned all the warriors without psychic abilities into mindless automata, and greatly amplified the abilities of all those who had more than a spark. Magnus was not like of mind, however. So great was his wrath that when the Cabal was discovered that the Primarch threatened to obliterate them utterly, but the very patron who had worked the mutations upon them in the first place intervened. Who can say what the most enigmatic and capricious of entities intended? In any event, the Demon Prince Magnus stayed his hand, instead banishing Ahriman and his Cabal from the planet of Sorceress, and condemning them to wander the Eye of Terror and beyond in a hopeless quest to understand chaos and the god Zeech. And that is where we will leave off on the lore on the legendary Ahzek Ahriman. If you were Ahriman, let me know how you would have changed things, what would you have done differently. Would you have still done this curse to your fellow legionnaires? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget guys, we do have a Patreon page. For only $1 a month, you guys can get more creepypastas and For the Greater Wars, along with some giveaways on there. Also, we got a Twitter, an Instagram, and a Facebook page. Now the Facebook page is there for all the 40K news that comes out, any giveaways we want to do, or any interactions with you guys, because Facebook is the easiest way where you guys can get in contact with us. So as always, I am the Sound Alchemist, part of the One Mind Syndicate, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow.
Ahriman.